The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Keeping Your Head Above Water, which is the last offering in the ASAP post-conference webinar series. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items related to today's webinar. First, you will notice a Zoom Viewer button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. You can use this button to adjust the size of your webinar screen. Secondly, in the control panel located on the upper right-hand side of your screen, you will see the word Questions listed. You can use the plus and minus button to open or close this box. If you have a question for Lisa, you can enter it here. Time permitting, any questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. And now I am pleased to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Lisa Maynard. Lisa is a licensed social worker with expertise in trauma, attachment, and adoption. She specializes in supporting women adjusting to life transitions, including change in relationships, spirituality, new parenting or empty nesting, change in career, and separation or divorce. Lisa is one of 67 yoga professionals in the world certified in trauma-sensitive yoga. She integrates yoga philosophy, mediation, and mindfulness in her work with clients, guiding them to explore life challenges in a safe, supportive environment. She encourages clients to find ways to let go of self-criticism and self-judgment, and empowers them to live to their full potential. Lisa also provides consultation and training on a wide variety of topics, including adoption-related issues, stress reduction, and wellness. Lisa serves children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families in need of support. You can visit Lisa's website by going to www.sativira.com. That is spelled SATIVIRYA.com. Lisa, thank you for taking the time to share with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this webinar. So this morning I'm going to talk about adoptive parent training and what we can do, what we're doing now, and what we might. We support parents through the process of adoption and post-placement and then post-adoption as well. So, so let's get ready and let's try to figure out how to keep our head above water. Okay. So I'd like to start with a poll right off the bat and find out from you who's in the room. So what best describes your current role? If you would take just a moment to check one or more of the boxes, and we'll see who's actually participating in the conference today. Okay, see the numbers scrolling up fast. Alrighty, so just one more moment for people who are trying to figure this out, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. So looks like the majority of you are supervisors or private agency caseworkers. A large number of you are foster and adoptive parents as well, and so you might have multiple roles here. So thank you very much. It gives us an idea of who's actually in the room. Okay. Alrighty. So let's begin. Again, we're going to talk about adoptive parent training. Can adoptive parents be prepared enough? And how can we best support families post-placement and post-adoption? So I'd like to start by talking about swimming lessons. Many of us learn to swim in a pool, perhaps at a community center, a local Y, a summer camp, maybe even in your own backyard like I did. In order to pass a swimming test, you have to move to the next level. You likely had to tread water for a minute or so. It was a very long time ago, but I remember that being part of the swimming test. So take a minute or two just to remember what that was like. Do you remember getting in the pool for the first time? Do you remember having to tread water to pass the test? What did it feel like? It might have been easy for you, and you might have had to take the test more than once. But most likely you passed level 1. And the whole point is trying to help us out in a crisis, right? You fall in the pool, you fall in the water. So imagine you're on a boat that capsizes in the ocean. You took swimming lessons as a child and passed the test. So just for a moment, imagine that. You fell in the ocean. So the second poll we have here is really taking a look at that. So I launched the poll. Consider how treading water under these circumstances, that is to say, if you were on a boat that capsized, you passed the swimming test as a child, you know how to tread water, under what circumstances would you feel prepared? So as you're ready, select one of the following. Yes, I am confident I can tread water. No way. Or yes, if I knew I had a life jacket and a rescue boat nearby. Would you feel prepared? So just give this a few moments as you kind of think it over. Might also depend on how far away that rescue boat is. Okay, so another couple seconds and we'll close the poll and share the results. Well, a few of you are confident you could tread water for hours. That's pretty cool. I'm pretty sure I couldn't do it for hours. And some of you don't feel prepared at all. And so some of that might be based on your knowledge of how well you swim. Maybe you're not a swimmer. Maybe you're afraid of the water. And then most of you believe that if you had a life jacket and a rescue boat nearby, you would be able to tread water. You'd be prepared and you would survive. So why do we take lessons? Sometimes to learn to swim for the fun of it. Swimming can be fun. And sometimes to be prepared just in case. I know when my kids were small, I wanted them to learn how to swim in case we were near a lake or happened to be at the ocean or at a friend's pool. If they fell in, they'd have some skills to save themselves. So we want to be prepared just in case that cruise doesn't go as planned. And there we have the Titanic. That certainly didn't go as they planned it. But the fact is that even if you learn what to do, doing it is usually a very different thing. Panic might take over, fear might take over. It might be far rougher than you ever imagined. So this little guy's name is Willie. And as I was thinking about putting together a webinar series for this series, I read this piece, happened to pop up on Facebook, about Willie. And it was by one of those dog whisperer kind of guys. And he says, I was recently asked by a rescue group how to prepare people who adopt a dog living with a variety of fears. So how do you prepare people? And he says, my honest opinion is that you can't. No matter how much people are instructed that they need to be patient with the dog, unless someone has lived with a dog who required months or years to feed, to go in and out of doors, to ride in cars, to be home alone, walk on a leash, and see new people or dogs, they just won't understand what they're signing up for. And if they did, they likely wouldn't. There is no guarantee that anyone can fix Willie. So this little dog's name is Willie. And he's lucky to be with someone who's willing to accommodate him. The problem is not, as I see it, says this writer, that we think everything can be made whole, especially something that might never have been whole to begin with. It's a fundamental inadequacy of the support and guidance the author received from the industry built to help her dog. So how is this relevant to helping a child, adopting a child? So I think that it takes years to learn how, for a child, to learn how to feel safe in a new home, to develop social skills, deal with transitions, to meet new people and be in new situations. Totally prepared is not so easy. The reality of adoption does not match the fantasy. Just like with the dogs, and hopefully I'm not offending anybody by making this analogy, children who have come from hard places, children who have experienced abuse or neglect, there just aren't quick fixes. Patience is required, and ongoing training and support for parents is critical. So oftentimes, as I've done training of adoptive parents, pre-adoptive parents in my career, I've heard questions about families' motivation to adopt. And as an adoptive parent, I sometimes get a little, I guess I get a little bit itchy about that. Because my motivation to adopt my kids was that I really wanted to be a mom, really, really wanted to be a mom. And wanting to be a mom or dad is perfectly normal. In fact, it is a biological imperative. Most human beings have a desire, a biological motivation to be a parent. That's how we perpetuate the species. Fantasizing about parenting is normal. So I can remember long ago when I was not a parent yet, watching people with their kids in the mall or in the shopping center, the grocery store, and the kids acting out, and I would think, I'm never, or I'm always, things that I really expected I would do. But how much different is the real thing from what you expected? I know it was far different for me. Sometimes the motivation to adopt can be problematic. And these are the kinds of things that we have to tease out in our pre-adoptive training. So when a family comes in and they want to rescue an orphan, on many occasions as I was working in an agency, I had calls around Christmas time from people who wanted to adopt an orphan, rescue an orphan, bring them home for Christmas so they can experience the joy of family. Now, part of that is really sweet, and that rescue part is just not based in reality. Sometimes there's motivation based on a faith calling, or to compensate for loss. I once had a family who wanted to adopt because their 8-year-old son had just died, and that's kind of tough. When these kinds of things motivate families, it often leads to unrealistic expectations, disappointment, and more. When the motivation is likely to result in positive outcomes, it's based on a foundation of commitment to hanging in there with the child through rough waters. And those with experience often know better. Headaches will come, whether you're an adoptive parent or you're parenting a child by birth. Nobody wants to believe that things will be too tough to bear. When I've done trainings, people have often said to me, why do you make it sound so dismal, so awful, so horrible. Aren't you supposed to be telling us we can do this? And absolutely, we want people to feel like they can do it. But they have to hear the hard stuff too, right? Prospective parents prefer to hold on to their dream, their idea of happily ever after. And in fact, to survive and eventually thrive, families may need to believe those deluded dreams for a time, as love abides, ever more scarred until reborn of grief and grit. Meaning that we really have to be holding the hope for our kids. As things get tough and the waters are rough, we really have to hold on to the belief that we can make it through and that our kids can make it through as well. So several years ago, the Donaldson Adoption Institute participated or led a project, the Adoptive Parent Preparation Project. And they found that it's widely accepted that in order for parents to be successful, for adoptive families to be successful, parent preparation, education, and support is vital. And so I think those findings just probably confirm what most of us already know. The families need good preparation, solid preparation, education about the core issues, and then ongoing support, not just through the adoption process, but for the long term, because adoption is a lifelong process. And oftentimes what happens when families get into a crisis situation, they bring a child home, they've got the few weeks of honeymoon with the child, and then suddenly a crisis erupts. And oftentimes we agency people are blamed for lack of poor training or lack of training altogether. We tend to blame the adoptive parents at times for their inexperience, and if they just listened, they would know this was coming. And sometimes we blame the child for their behavior. Now, we don't do this with any malice or ill intent, but a crisis tends to throw everybody into a crisis situation, a crisis response. But blaming doesn't get us anywhere. And what we really need to do is make sure that the training and the support is in place for families, that our response is measured and thoughtful. A great deal of variability in the training and support services around the country. There's not a national standard, and there are, we have responsibilities to provide this, and oftentimes we're not well equipped to do so. So what gets in the way? Oftentimes, system issues get in the way of adequate training for families, training and support. Lack of resources is huge. In the agencies I've worked in, lack of resources was one of the biggest problems. Lack of resources for staff to do the training, qualified staff to do the training, staff who already had an understanding of the core issues of adoption. Lack of resources for post-adoption services was a huge issue. If we're not funded, who pays for it? Oftentimes the families don't have the resources, and then there aren't the resources in the community as well. Inadequate training of therapists who work in private pay. They oftentimes just don't have what it takes to help our families and our kids. Family issues get in the way. The parents' overwhelming desire to have a family. There are unrealistic expectations that go along with that. Love is enough. Oftentimes I've seen that the parents bring their own history of loss or trauma into the mix, and it stays underground for a very long time, but our kids are pretty good at finding those underlying issues and pushing those buttons. Families often don't come back to the agency looking for support or guidance because of fear of judgment. I find that this is especially true when families are thinking about adopting a second child, and they're worried that we're going to judge them as not adequate, not competent to be parents, and then dash their dreams of having a bigger family. And sometimes it's lack of personal resources. So if post-adoption supports are not offered through the agency and they need to get out in the community to get those services, many of our providers, at least here in New York State, are not taking insurance. And so out-of-pocket payments are costly. So what are our opportunities for improvement? We can educate the professionals, require ongoing preparation and education for families, and make sure that those educational opportunities are integrated into the post-adoption support. So giving adoption preparation courses at the beginning, before a family even has a child in their home, that's a good thing. And I think it falls a little bit short because oftentimes you're not quite sure how to tread water until you're in the ocean. Include individual, group, and professional experienced parents, birth parents, adopted individuals. Get those people in the room talking to the pre-adoptive families. Help them get just a varied perspective on what they're getting into. And then using a variety of teaching methods online, like webinars like this, lectures, formal, informal, and I think I've included a number of resources at the end of this webinar. What else to include? Mental health issues, normative parenting issues, developmental issues, talking with children about adoption, search for birth family. Sometimes we leave the birth family out of this and don't really think about how our kids, especially the kids, well, all kids who were adopted in my experience, have questions about birth family and are wanting to search at some point in their lives. And then what are the resources for support? In addition to those topics, we also should be providing specific types of education for families who are adopting specific kinds of kids. Children with multiple disabilities, children who are adopted transracially, transculturally, internationally, kids from the public child welfare system, talking about trauma, abuse, and neglect. Talking about families with adoption with some kind of contact, whether it's regular contact or just sporadic contact through an agency. That's important. And the LGBT families as well. So specific training for specific issues. And then making sure that the training is trauma-informed. I think that our families don't really get the extent to which trauma impacts the children that they're adopting. Using a birth family, a birth culture, their entire birth history, trauma from abuse or neglect, helping them to recognize the signs and symptoms of clients. So this includes our clients, the people that we're training to become adoptive parents and foster parents. What is their trauma and how is that impacting their life? And how is that likely to sort of raise its head as we come up into parenting? So what does it take for effective adoptive parent preparation? So I think it should be defined in terms of how we facilitate appropriate knowledge, skills, and expectations related to adoption in general. And then again, how we facilitate appropriate knowledge, skills, and expectations related to the unique history and the needs of the specific child to be adopted. And that's where that ongoing preparation comes in, because oftentimes when we start the adoption process with a family, they just don't know what the needs of the child are going to be. Oftentimes the families don't really have a clear idea of how they want to adopt, whether it's internationally, a baby, or a child from the Child Welfare Service. I think we need to create, as adoption professionals, a collaborative relationship with adoptive parents, helping them to feel welcomed, valued, respected, and supported. I think this is important in terms of having parents have a greater understanding of what we're trying to communicate to them, a greater understanding of their personal vulnerabilities, being open to and receptive to the information that we're providing, and coming around to having realistic beliefs and expectations about adoption. If we create that atmosphere of collaboration and we're working together toward the same goal, so that the child has a family, that the family has a child, and that they have a high rate of success in meeting the child's needs throughout the lifetime. They need the skills to manage the inherent challenges that can be associated with an adoptive family. It's no small task. We need to get real. We need to bring in adult adoptees, kids who are in care currently, through teen panels perhaps, adoptive parents who are in the know, who were greatly challenged and survived. Peggy Sewell, who ran Children Awaiting Parents for many years, in fact she was the founder, used to do a workshop that she called To Hell and Back. And she wanted the rest of us to know, all of us new green adoptive parents, she wanted us to know that it is going to get rough. These kids are going to take you to hell and back, but it is imperative that you have the skills and the preparation and the support to get through. You owe it to these kids to stick with it through the long haul. Peggy is a great advocate. She still is a great advocate in our community, and I think on the national level as well. And I used to think, no way, Peggy, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not adopting a child who's going to have any hurt or any pain. And she used to shake her finger at me. Oh my goodness, it made me so angry. And then as my kids started to get older, we started to experience some of the things that she had talked about. I didn't believe her until it was happening. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that it's really, really difficult for families, again, to get prepared enough, prepared in a way that we professionals would like them to be prepared to deal with anything that's thrown at them until they're actually in the mix. It's hard to know what it feels like to tread water in the ocean until you're in it. We have to emphasize the role played by high-quality caregiving in the amelioration of early developmental problems. Love is everything, but it's not enough. I know when I'm doing trainings, many people think, I'm just going to love this child all the way out of her past hurts. And they're so frustrated and so disappointed when that doesn't happen. I recently worked with a family who adopted a child 4 years ago. He was 12 years old when they adopted him. He had been in 16 homes in those years, and they love him and they're committed to him. And he doesn't quite yet believe it. And they're very frustrated that he doesn't believe it. When I see them in therapy, they keep saying, we're here, you know we're here, you know we're here. And he doesn't believe it. And they don't believe that he doesn't believe it. But he just doesn't. He already had 16 places to call home that did not keep him. It takes patience, caring from the heart, and a commitment to be there. Always, forever, no matter what. It's a long time. And these kids are going to give us a run. I think we have to emphasize the high degree of variability found in children experiencing the same type of adverse biological and pre-placement experiences. Some kids with trauma histories are very, very resilient and are able to sort of pick themselves up and get through it. And some kids are not quite as resilient. The risks associated are not a guarantee of problems. They're an indicator. So in my mind, we have to help parents prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I really feel we need to hold the hope for these kids and that part is critical. We as professionals, we as parents need to help them. We need to help them believe that they are lovable, that they're valuable, and that they have a future. But we also have to believe that. We have to hold that belief for them so that they can get there. It sure might get rough. Those waters can get pretty darn rough. Splashing in your face. Yeah. So we need to prepare them to the extent that's possible. How do we ensure that they're as prepared as best they possibly can be, knowing that they can't do it? We just can't do it all. So I believe we need to practice peace. Practice peace, model peace, empower people who are adopting our kids to feel peace. So to begin with, patience. Model patience as professionals by being patient with people who are just beginning to understand what adoption is all about. I was talking with a couple the other day who are interested in adopting a baby, and I talked about birth family and transracial issues, and Mom was pretty open. She was sitting there with an open posture and an open attitude, and Dad was saying, this isn't an issue. It's not going to be an issue. It won't be for our family. You know, those mothers are not good, and we're going to take this kid and we're going to create a great family. And if we adopt a child from another race, my family will be fine. They're perfectly happy with children of any color. Race, they don't see color. And, you know, I could get frustrated. I would say a part of me was feeling frustrated. However, he doesn't know. He just doesn't know. There's an ignorance in what he's saying, and not because he's an ignorant man, because he just hasn't been exposed to what we professionals have been exposed to. Having empathy for their desire to parent, and their empathy for their lack of knowledge and skill. They just don't get it. But how could they? They haven't been there yet. Helping them to tune into awareness, tune into the underlying issues, their own personal biases, their own personal trauma. How do we help families get there? How do we help them tune into that? Having some consideration. The adoption process is often demanding, frustrating, and emotionally exhausting in ways that are quite unexpected. I do a lot of advocacy around getting older kids adopted. And so I walk around our community talking about the need for adoptive parents, and there are all these kids waiting. And then families come on board and they work to get certified, and then there's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of steps that we have to go through, that we have to put parents through just to become adoptive parents. They don't expect it, and they don't hear us when we say this might take some time. And then using every opportunity to build understanding, knowledge, and skill. Everything is a learning opportunity. Everything is a potential learning opportunity. So, parenting, just like running a country. What are the things that we hope that families learn? Keep in mind that parenting is influenced by an underlying perspective about the child, an underlying perspective about parenting, an underlying perspective about self, society, foster care, and adoption. That's a whole bunch of stuff that's under the surface. So how do we get parents to understand those things? We need to start by focusing on the core issues of adoption. So Silverstein and Kaplan identified these issues in 1982, and I think they're still very relevant. And looking at the core issues of adoption as experienced by every member of the triad, I think that helps to increase awareness and a better understanding for everybody. Each member of the triad experiences loss. Perhaps the parents can find ways to identify with the child around their experiences of loss. Rejection. No one's afraid of swimming, they're afraid of drowning. No one's afraid of love, they're afraid of rejection. Think about your own self. It's tough to open up and be vulnerable, to expose yourself. If you've felt rejection, if you've experienced rejection in the past, to open it up again, to open your heart up again and bring love in is scary, very scary. So for the kids that we're working with, the kids who've been in care for years, moving from place to place, they're really very frightened of feeling that rejection again. In fact, they're more willing to reject us first. The guilt and shame. I've worked with many kids who just don't want anybody to know that they're in an adoptive family. Don't tell anyone. I just want to be a regular kid. And by the way, that guilt and shame also goes for the parents. That feeling that you don't have control over your body and that you need to go about parenting in a different way. Grief brings up the same kinds of things. It's not too hard to understand the grief experienced by a child who's been abused and neglected. How does their grief touch you? That's a question for the adoptive parents. What does that bring up in you? How does that impact on your heart? What grief does it remind you of? And is that too difficult to tolerate, or can you find a way to join around that grief? Identity. Who am I? Our kids really struggle with this. Who am I and who am I like? The developmental task of adolescence is to separate. But if you're not sure where you came from, how do you separate? It's very challenging, very challenging. And then intimacy. How do we form close, lasting bonds? How do we form close, lasting bonds with this family, with our future people who are in our future. Who can we trust? Intimacy is about trust. Who can we trust? How do we get there? Mastery and control. Our kids, most of our adopted kids, I would say all of our adopted kids, haven't had much control over where they wind up. And their need to control is really about their need to survive. And I think we need to help parents understand that. So as the kids are pushing away and controlling, I had a couple in my office yesterday who were talking about this kid, if I say the sky is purple and he says the sky is orange, we're never going to agree. He's never going to agree with me and see it my way, even if I know what's right. And he's not going to, because he needs to be the boss. And he does. This child needs to be the boss. He grew up in Colombia until he was 11. He survived on the streets by taking control of himself. He doesn't feel like he needs parents yet. He doesn't trust his parents yet. He's trying to survive. Dr. Joyce McGuire-Pavo talks about the normative crisis in adoption, and that it's lifelong. It goes on and on. The grief, the rage, the shame, these are all normal responses to a not normal thing. Losing your birth parents, losing your birth culture, losing your history is not normal in our society. So the reactions are a normal response to a not normal situation in life. Rage is a normal response and a normal expression of grief. Depression is a normal response and a normal expression of grief. And if we could help parents to understand that, they might have better understanding for their children. I think it's really important to help parents understand that our kids did not get what they needed when they were young. They didn't get the nurturing, they didn't get the love, they didn't get the care. Oftentimes they didn't get the food that they needed. I have a little girl in my practice. She's not so little, she's 13 now. But she said basically I had to figure out how to feed myself when I was 2 years old. That 2-year-old needs to be nurtured, even though she's inside of a 12-year-old's body. And it's hard. It's really hard to see the child within the teenager. When the teenager is acting out, all we see is a kid that we think just should have the ability to get it together. And families just don't understand. They don't get it. And it's hard to. It's really hard to get because you're looking at a teenage body. And that baby is raging. And that baby is the one that needs the attention. And we don't really want to give that baby so much attention when they're driving us crazy. But that's where we have to go. We have to go to that child inside to give them the nurturing that they need. We have to enforce and reinforce, remind and reframe adoptive parents to have realistic expectations. Because you had a rough time in school as a kid in your biological intact family doesn't mean that your child is going to be able to buck up, pull themselves up by the bootstraps in the same way. It just often doesn't happen. So we need to have more realistic expectations. The couple that was in my office yesterday said, well, when will he be like an 18-year-old? When he's 20? Maybe. Maybe when he's 25. Maybe when he's 35. Hopefully sooner than that. But, you know, it's hard to say. And it's our job to support the parents in my opinion, so that they can make it through, so they can get through those really tough years. I think teaching the practice of mindfulness, validate the emotional state, the hurt, the abandonment. What is this child feeling in this moment? So instead of reacting to their outbursts, maybe sitting with, what's going on? How are you feeling? And it might take a child a while to figure out what they're feeling. They might not be able to identify it in the moment. But to provide an opportunity for them to be heard in that moment. What's going on and what do they need? I think we can model this in our training. I think we can model this in our support. How can we be patient and model that mindfulness? So, occasionally I'll get calls from a parent who says, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I want to give the kid back. Those are very, very painful calls to get. And oftentimes we in the social work profession react to that by saying, okay, how do I get that kid out? Where am I going to move him to? What are we going to do next? How do we take care of this right now? And what I've found over the years is if I say to a family, what's going on for you? How are you feeling? What are you feeling in this moment? Oftentimes, most oftentimes, they're feeling helpless and hopeless. I don't know what else to do. I don't think I could get through this alone. And helping them to identify what they're feeling oftentimes helps them to settle and calm and then to begin to problem solve. Practicing the Zen of parenting, holding on to the child with an open hand and an open heart, not clutching, not grasping at that hope of someday this kid will be a student, the captain of the football team, a professional skater, whatever the dream was, letting go of the dream and holding on to the child. The idea, the concept of letting go to gain control. Again, not easy to do, and certainly not easy to do if you are in the moment of a kid who is acting out in crisis. I think focusing on attachment is the key, especially early on. Focusing on attachment over and over and over again, as if that 14-year-old was just born to you. It takes hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times to practice attachment, to build the trust, that cycle of trust. And we forget that even though our kids are 14, they need to start that practice. They need to start that. They need to build that trust. So working on attachment. The chores will get done eventually. They'll learn how to clean their room. They'll learn how to get good grades or not. Again, sort of that Zen of parenting. What can you control and what can you not? And the most important thing is forming those bonds of trust and attachment with the child so that they have the tools to be healthy, functioning adults as they grow. I suggest developing a parenting toolbox. So here's just a few ideas. Safety glasses for the days when the you-know-what will fly. Put those safety glasses on. Protect yourself. Find a way to deflect, perhaps, some of the stuff that's flying around. We need glue in our parenting toolbox. Focus on attachment. What is going to hold us together? Take out your crowbar every now and then. What's hiding underneath? What's really going on? What's this feeling that you're having? What is it triggering inside you? Teflon for the things that we can let slide. Most of what the kids are throwing at us is not about you. It's not about us. It's about what happened in their past. It's about their feeling of lack of control. They're not feeling valued throughout their lives. Let's take out a screwdriver now and then. Sometimes the strategies need a little tightening up. What can we do to change it up? How can we improve? The pliers are things that we need to bend and flex. And then absolutely, that self-care handbook. We all need to practice self-care. We as professionals, in my opinion, don't do that enough. We're not very good at it. We know how to talk about it. We know how to suggest it to others, but we're not so good at it ourselves. So finding the time to have a break, do a little self-care. And help parents understand that their influence is limited. What do you think they can do, and what do you think they can't do? How can they come to a better understanding of the limits of their influence? There's a whole lot of things that influence our kids over a lifetime, and we're just a part of that. And then continue to encourage them to make use of that toolbox. Again, I think as professionals, we have to be there to help when things get tough, to be responsive, not reactive. We, because we know, ought to be expecting the kids to act out in such a way that they're pushing the parents to a limit, to their limit. They are, again, they're experts at this. They know how to find those buttons, the big, big, big buttons. So how do we be responsive without being reactive? How can we stay calm in the face of a crisis a family is having? It's not always necessary for us to rush in and move the kid. It might be a little bit of a respite. It might be just a little bit of a timeout. It might be a validation for the parents that, yeah, this is so darn hard. And it is not what you expected. We get that. Finding a way to listen to what's underneath. What's going on? What are the vulnerabilities and hidden biases that might create barriers to learning and understanding without judgment? Oops. What do you need? Finding out from the families what they need for themselves. How can we be helpful? What will it take for you to parent this child? What would it take for this to be successful? For you to feel good? What will it take? Can we get creative? A woman who worked for me in an agency running a parent support group to find really unusual ways to help parents feel supported, feel validated. She would do things like find bunk beds, get them donated for the kids to create a better sense in their home, finding people to organize furniture drives and organize the space in the house. She once found someone to donate massages for her parent group. Things that are really help the families to feel like somebody cares and somebody understands what I'm going through. Getting creative and fun. She once did a workshop about having fun, and she brought kazoos and boas and balloons, and everybody had a blast and felt a little bit refreshed before they walked out of the room. I think a buddy system is a great idea. Buddy up pre- and post-adoptive families. When I went through my adoption process, that was one of the things that we got. We got assigned a buddy, and that buddy helped us complete the paperwork, answered questions, things that we didn't really understand, things I was embarrassed to ask the agency about. Yeah, looking back from my professional point of view, I shouldn't have been embarrassed. There was no need. I didn't know the things I didn't know. That was okay. But having somebody who had gone through it was such a comfort to me as I went through the process. And then if there was a crisis, I would call my buddy. If there was a problem, hey, did this happen to you? With somebody who could give me their perspective. And I really appreciated that. We need to remind ourselves, as parents, as professionals, this might not be what we expected. We might just land in Holland instead of Italy. I think it's really helpful and really important for the professionals to become resource experts. Or find an expert you can rely on, somebody who knows what the resources are available in the community. Post-adoption supports, adoption competent therapists, pediatricians who get it, attorneys who get it, people who know what our families are going through and have an understanding. I have a list of online resources here. And then finally, I just would like to end with this quote I think is really, really positive and important. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most resilient and responsive to change. If we can help our families learn how to be resilient and responsive to change, if we can get there ourselves, I think we can help our families to be more successful and our kids to grow up in permanent, forever homes. Thank you very much. I have a list of resources here, online resources, and I'm happy to field a couple of questions if you have any.
Hi, Lisa. It's Nicole. I don't see that we have any questions currently.
Okay.
Again, do you want to share your email address in case folks want to email you offline with any questions they may have?
Sure thing. My email address is lmaynard, that's LMAYNARD, at sativirya.com, and I'll spell that. It's unusual. It's S as in Sam, A, T as in Thomas, I, V as in Victor, I, R, Y, A.com. I think I've got my website up here on the last slide. So thank you very much, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity to do a webinar, and looking forward to more of this in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And Lisa, thank you for taking the time to share with us today on such an important topic. I know we received some feedback from some of the participants that really appreciated the information as well and felt like it was very much on target. So thank you so much. As a reminder, all of the webinars have been recorded and are available on the Harmony website at www.harmonyfamilycenter.org. We hope you've enjoyed the ASAP post-conference webinar series. It is our goal to provide future webinar offerings that will be of value to you and others in the child welfare and adoption fields. We'd love to hear your suggestions or requests for future webinars. You can share your input by sending an email to Nicole, Nicole, at harmonyfamilycenter.org. Notification of future learning opportunities will be provided to webinar attendees and will also be posted on the Harmony website. Lisa, thank you again, and thanks to everyone who has participated in today's webinar. Have a great day.